better. All right, today my goal is to finish this, and like I tell y'all all the time, if we don't, we don't. But I think we're going to get close to finishing this today. If you have questions, comments, please feel free to speak up. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on things and your opinions on things. I want to look at spontaneous generation, kind of closing with that idea, and then I want to kind of sum up some of the ideas, going to try to quickly summarize some things that we have talked about up to this point. So spontaneous generation, again, is the idea of life coming from non-life. So at the very heart of evolution, this had to have happened. At some point in time, you trace history back, at some point in time, life had to come from non-life, which I think is the most lethal problem with evolution. The thing it can't get over, because science has proven that this is not the case. But it had to have happened, which defies evolution if that was the case. So let me just look at a couple of things with you here for a minute. Revolution to be the answer to our existence, spontaneous generation had to have occurred. Life had to come from non-life for this to be the case. Although Epicurus, Aristotle, and Charles Darwin believed in the theory of spontaneous generation, it has thoroughly over and over been disproven. Doctors Lazzaro Spallanzani, I probably butchered that name, and Louis Pasteur in 1859 both proved this theory to be false and impossible. Some ideas of medieval period, things they thought happened. They've proven, though, that dust does not turn into flies. They used to think that. It's been shown that's not the case. Meat does not turn into maggots. Wheat kernels and cheese do not turn into mice. Scientists now assume that this phenomenon, spontaneous generation, could occur. It had to have at some point in time for their theory to be true, but it's never been replicated in a laboratory despite mankind's greatest minds desperately trying to cause this to happen. Again, for centuries now, decades, they've been trying to reproduce this in these high-tech laboratories. They have failed to do it, and they are never going to be able to do this. Why do scientists teach that this is the way that life came to being when science itself disproves that possibility? At the very heart of evolution is something very unscientific. You know, people will try to claim that we are unscientific. At the very heart of evolution is an unscientific principle. Spontaneous generation does not occur, never has occurred. One evolutionist admitted, and again, this is not a creationist, but an evolutionist has said this, more than 30 years of experimentation on the origin of life in the fields of chemical and molecular evolution have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life rather than its solution. Whereas the deeper that they dig into this, the more they see there's a problem here. How do you get life from non-life? At present, all discussions on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance. And again, here's a doctor that's an evolutionist, says we haven't figured this out. We haven't come close to figuring out how life could have come from non-life. Another evolutionist confessed it is extremely improbable, and I'm going to show y'all the probability numbers here in just a minute. It is extremely improbable that proteins and nucleic acids, both of which are structurally complex, arose spontaneously in the same place at the same time. That's the other issue with this. Not just that it happened once. It's going to happen, it's got to happen simultaneously in several settings to even make this possible, life coming into being. Yet it also seems impossible to have one without the other. And so at first glance, one might have to conclude that life could never, in fact, have originated by chemical means. This person is exactly right, but that's not a confession that evolutionists want to admit. They don't want to say that. On the contrary, scientists have been forced into admitting that the law of biogenesis is now in effect. And of course, this is a scientific principle, by the way. The idea that kinds produce the same kinds. In science, they study biogenesis, which you might see is named after the book of Genesis, ironically enough. This law states that life comes from living matter. All life comes from preceding life, and that its own kind. That's what biogenesis says. Sounds very similar to what Moses wrote back in Genesis chapter 1. So when you think about, again, spontaneous generation, again, one of the most epic experiments, and I'm not getting all the details of this, but Louis Pasteur, using a gooseneck flask, was able to prove that again, the things that wind up growing in water, like stagnant water, may develop algae or whatever, but it's coming from something outside. It's not the water turning into this. It's other airborne things they're getting. So it's able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt there is no spontaneous generation. And Pasteur, who, by the way, was a strong believer in God, a great scientist who was a strong believer in God, says little science takes you away from God, but more of it takes you to Him. And I agree. And you said, sometimes people accuse us of being afraid of science. My challenge to scientists is keep studying. The more you study, the more you want to see the problems with your theory. It couldn't have happened the way that you said it does. And the more you dig into it, you will see that that is the case. All right, so Pasteur conclusively refuted the theory of spontaneous generation and convincingly demonstrated that microorganisms are everywhere, even in the air, and that is the source of things growing on other objects and so forth. George Wald, who wrote The Origin of Life in Scientific American in August 1954, said this: when it comes to the origin of life, there are only two possibilities. Again, he said this a long time ago, 69 years ago, but this is still true today. When it comes to origin of life, there are only two possibilities: creation or spontaneous generation. There is no other explanation. It has to be one of those two. But again, spontaneous generation doesn't work. There is no third way. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago, talking about Louis Pasteur's experiments, but that leads us to only one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We cannot accept that on philosophical grounds. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. I, again, appreciate this guy's honesty, but you see the ridiculous nature of this argument. So here's an evolutionist saying spontaneous generation can occur, hadn't occurred, but we choose to believe it because we don't want to believe in God. And that's the bottom line. It's not that there's no proof of God, that there's no proof of creation. They just don't want to believe it. They don't want to have moral constraints. And so they're going to choose to believe something that's impossible. Again, like I said, I appreciate the guy's honesty, but it shows how ridiculous that argument is.
So this is the same thing as the first generation with those that had said that He had done miracles. So what do we do about that? And I think it's, you try to help people, but really, truly, the old saying, you can't help stupid.
Yeah.
It's just too much proof out there not to accept.
It really is. And the people I feel sorry for, I agree with you. Those out there that just choose not to believe it, have this attitude right here, I've got very little sympathy for somebody like that. But those, like the kids in the classroom that are fed this day after day after day from people that are supposed to be reputable, and they're being hoodwinked. Our entire society, the entire world is being hoodwinked on this subject, and it angers me. I mean, it really, really does. That's who I feel sorry for, the little kids that don't know any better.
Well, also, the people who consider themselves to be religious, I remember back in the fairly early 60s, can't think of the news broadcaster, but he was very famous back in the day, and we had gotten a something on the old disc, the wax disc.
The record, like a record, yeah.
I had a record out there, and it was explaining about how old the dinosaurs were. And it's like billions and billions of years ago. He was a very, very intelligent man, right on up to proving that he has very little knowledge of God. And for anybody to believe that, I think there's a lot of news people that don't even research the things that they're saying.
Exactly right.
And that's like you're saying with the scholars, so to speak, are the ones that are passing this off and shoving it down the kids of their generation.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And they had that ulterior motive The only motive is just get God out of the picture, so they can do whatever they want to do.
And of course,
That's
he
the bottom
probably
line.
got paid quite well for making those records.
Yes, sir.
And, but it's really sad.
It is that. It is that. And that's why, we got to keep trying to get our message out there as much as we can. And I'm thankful there's a lot of God-fearing people out there that are trying to do the same thing around the country and around the world. And I hope that they will be able to get that message out wherever they are. It's a great point, brother.
Cronkite, so we could,
Yeah. I was trying to think of his name because his Cronkite was
Well,
he was an intelligent man.
yes, it was.
Charlie.
I look at things sometimes, it's like Solomon said, go out and make some noise.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point, Charlie. That's what the evolutionists are doing. They shout so loud, people on our side, they're going to shout us down and try to belittle us. The more we get into this thing, they got zero evidence of what they believe. But they're going to do everything they can to belittle us and make us look dumb. When you look at this stuff, they're the ones that are believing in ignorance. They're the ones that don't have science. They're trying to accuse us of that. They're dead wrong. They're dead wrong. But that's what they try to do, is shout you down. And again, the idea if I shout louder and shout longer, people would just take my side regardless of the evidence. But the evidence is still the evidence. You can't change the evidence. It's overwhelming. So think about it from a probability standpoint. Just again, the spontaneous generation. So what's the chance of life? Just even little parts of a cell or whatever coming to be. So we're going to think about this, a probability thing that we can all understand. So what's the chance of getting heads every time a penny is flipped? So again, that's something that all of us can relate to. All of us have flipped a penny or a quarter, whatever, seeing how many times it lands heads. And again, in coaching football over the years and hundreds of games I coached in, you're always hoping you're going to win the toss because you feel like that. So I actually looked it up one time. Should I tell my players to choose heads or tails? And like there was an experiment that was done. It was like, I forget which way it went now. It was like 50.00001 chance of being one or the other. It was very little difference. But anyway, you're trying to see, you want it to be a certain thing. All right, so let's say getting two heads in a row. Well, just one head, of course, is 1 out of 2. There's either going to be heads or tails. But the more you do it, the more the problem comes into being. So twice, 2 heads in a row. I got 1 chance out of 4. 25%, not a great chance, but you got a pretty good chance of that. Think about 3 heads in a row. 1 in 8. So now it dropped to 12.5%. 8 heads in a row. 1 in 256. So you see how the problem gets worse exponentially as you look at this problem. 100 heads in a row. Does anybody honestly think that if I tossed a quarter, flipped a quarter 100 times, I get 100 heads? That's not going to happen. The likelihood of that happening is 10 to the 30th power. One with 30 zeros behind it. So what is the problems of life's origin? What's a chance, again, we're talking about just the very minute things to this right here, not talking about a real cell, living cell. What's the chance of getting a small protein, 150 amino acids long, by natural processes, whereas by chance, but just happening randomly? The chance is 10 to the 164th power. That's a 1 with 164 chances of that occurring randomly. That's far greater than a Google. A Google is 1 with 100 zeros in it. 10 to the 164th chance. Now, let's make it even more. So there we're talking about just a small protein. Again, I'm not talking about things that a cell needs. We're talking about just a small protein, 10 to the 164th chances. All right, what's the probability then to make the proteins needed by the simplest known cell? All right, so now we're getting into a bigger picture. 10 to the 164th times 250 proteins. There's the chance of that happening. 10 to the 41,000th power of by chance getting some of the things you need to have one cell. It's a pretty big if, I think. So again, think about that from the idea of tossing a coin. If you tossed a coin that many times, what's the likelihood of it landing heads every single time? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Sir Fred Hoyle, we mentioned him way back several weeks ago, a couple of months ago, I guess now. He was the one that actually named the Big Bang Theory. Okay, he wasn't a creationist, but he named the Big Bang Theory. But later on, he became skeptical of it. Said this, he was one that used the example of the Rubik's Cube. You know, of many blind people getting their Rubik's Cube by chance. He was that guy. So Fred Hoyle said this: the probability of a single cell, again, 10 to the 41,000th power. Here's his quote: an outrageously small probability that cannot be faced if the whole universe consisted of organic soup. Whereas if the entire universe were a soup, you couldn't get that. Whereas life has to come from that soup. That's what they'll say, the primordial soup is the way they phrase that. If the whole universe were that, there's a chance it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen by chance. Think about it again, put it in this way. I taught math for 23 plus years. So think about a probability problem. We used to teach probability. There was a mathematician named Borel who came up with a law of probability. And here's what he said. So Dr. Emile Borel, one of the world's foremost experts on mathematical probability, formulated a basic law of probability. And this is what it states. It states that any event which has a probability of 1 times 10 to the 50th or more is an event that which we can state with certainty will never happen, no matter how much time passes. So I should say a lower chance of that happening, a higher exponent. Didn't word that very well. But 1 times 10 to the 50th power. He says you got to throw it out. So by mathematical principles, then you got to throw evolution out. People talk about being scientific or whatever. It's unmathematical. It's unmathematical. Defies mathematics. It defies laws of probability. It could not. It was impossible that it happened that way. No chance. Zero chance of it happening that way. Carl Sagan, who is one of the foremost atheists, I guess, in the world a number of years ago, of Cornell University, calculated the probability of life forming on one planet spontaneously. Again, by chance. So life happening by chance on a particular planet. But again, I appreciate his honesty. 1 times 10 to the, I make sure I get this right, 2 billionth power. So the chance of life coming spontaneously on its own on a planet is 1 times 10 to the 2 billionth power. Far exceeding what Borel said, far exceeding common sense. It could not have happened that way. You'll say, how big of a number is that? If you had one with 2 billion zeros behind it. To write out that number would take 6,000 books of 300 pages to write all the zeros.
How long does it take you to count from 1 to 2 billion?
Maybe the rest of your life. It might be an impossible task.
Whole time counting 100.
I was thinking the same thing about me. It's work count to 10.
It's an impossible problem. It's an impossible problem that we're talking about right here. So this far exceeds the limits of probability. Thus, according to Dr. Borel, there's absolutely no chance that life evolved spontaneously on the earth. It could not have happened that way. So with all the things we've looked at over the last few months, this is the biggest problem in the whole thing. Spontaneous generation could not have happened. It is impossible. I've run across a couple of things on this. Some other things related to just a probability problem. Just putting evolution into a mathematical situation. The greatest number of events that could occur in all space and time. So just the number of things that could happen using their scenario. 13.7 billion or whatever they say for the Big Bang, or 20 billion. What's 7 billion here or there? But would be 1 times 10 to the 170th power. Okay, so again, that's a much smaller number than some of those, or at least I guess backwards there. It's much smaller as a number than some of those other odds that we just talked about. So again, it's more than a Google. Have the probability of even the simplest conceivable replicating system, again, life that can produce more life, can replicate, arising by chance, as one in the universe for all time is 1 times 10 to the 280th. Okay, so again, that's all the events that could possibly have happened in all the history of the universe. One replicating system is more than that. Can't have happened. It's impossible.
Even if something turned into one cell, just the probability that one cell surviving
Yes.
would be ridiculous.
Yes.
It's got to turn into something else.
That's exactly right.
And there's just so many things that could happen to destroy it.
That is exactly right. A great point. Great point. So when the occurrence of any event is smaller than one out of a number of events that could ever possibly occur, then probability of its occurrence is considered to be zero. Thus, life coming spontaneously into existence is mathematically impossible. It could not have occurred. No way that it could have happened. So it's utterly impossible. Mathematically, evolution just doesn't add up. Take the science part out of it. Mathematically, and again, that was my field for a while, doesn't add up. I saw this online. I thought this was pretty cool. Y'all can quote Hebrews 11 and verse 1. What does Hebrews 11 and verse 1 say about faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I saw this quote and I thought this was pretty cool. Evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links unseen. And so you think about, again, they talk about Christianity being a faith-based thing. Evolution is much more based on faith, things that you can't prove and things that you can't see, than creation. You know, we can believe, at least we can believe in, I don't know how everything happened, but we know there's a God whose wisdom is mind-blowing. We can't conceive of the mind of God, the ways of God. How does it come from nothing? Can't be explained. So I wanted to kind of sum up some things we have talked about over the last few months and think about, okay, here's some things that evolutionists either accept by faith or either they have no answer for. And this is just the hem of the garment. There's a whole bunch more that you could say. Here's a few that we've talked about. The Big Bang. All right, so the Big Bang itself, that this is how everything happened, defies observable evidence. So again, science is based on observation, true science. And I've told y'all before, I've got great respect for observational science, operational science. Have zero respect for historical science, because it's a joke. When you talk about evolution, no way. So it defies observable evidence. So what happened? Either nothing blew up, which there's a little problem with that. How could nothing blow up? Or you have an eternal dot. So I told you before, to me that's the choices. You can believe in the beginning God or in the beginning dot. I know y'all feel the same way. I'd rather take my chance on in the beginning God than in the beginning an eternal dot. So people say, well, where did God come from? Where did your dot come from? The theory of inflation. So to cause this, again, scientists, I don't understand all the wheres, whys, wherefores, but scientists have seen that with their calculations, the Big Bang had to have some help. There's something called inflation. This dot, this little speck, this eternal thing had to start expanding. It had to inflate. Okay, so you need inflation for that to happen. But what they've now figured out is if that process started, it wouldn't have stopped. It would have kept on going on, which leads you to the ridiculous idea of the multiverse, the multi-universe that people talk about, the multiverse. The idea that there's an infinite number of universes out there. And it is so bizarre, and it's hard to believe that intelligent people would even believe that. So again, there's some universe out there right now where there's some people that look just like you and I having the same conversation we are. Ridiculous. But that's where the multiverse takes you. So if you believe in inflation, you have to believe in multiple universes. Ridiculous. Some evolutionists realize the problem with this. This is a problem. So some will come with the idea of, okay, we're created by aliens. Okay, so that makes more sense than believing that there's a God. That's what they've come to. Some reputable people. Stephen Hawking, I think, had come to the idea. I think Richard Dawkins had come to that idea that we're created by aliens. Ridiculous. Charlie, I'll get you in a minute. There's growing skepticism in the scientific community, by the way. Not just us, but there's a lot of reputable scientists that are actually looking at the data and saying, this doesn't fit. Now, they haven't necessarily gone on the idea that they believe in a God, but This doesn't add up here. So it violates science, including laws of thermodynamics. We talk about spiral galaxies and the spiral arms. If the universe is 13.7 billion years old, these galaxies shouldn't have these spiral arms. They should have disappeared by now over the millions and billions of years. No explanation talking about galaxies. Where did the galaxies even come from? We showed y'all some quotes from premier people in astronomy. I mean, experts in astronomy that say, you know what, and I appreciate their honesty. We've got no explanation for how the galaxies came into being. We can't explain it. No way. We don't know. We're still looking for how. They don't know. So again, they're propagating this as fact. They got zero evidence, no explanation for how the theories go, or even just one star. Gas does not contract on itself. That doesn't happen. Gas continues to expand, but somehow you got to get the gas coalescing there to form the star. Defies what we see in science. Defies observable science. The temperatures of the cosmic background radiation, they can explain it on a couple different levels. And I'm getting all that again from two things. It is much more uniform than it should be. It's one thing in the Big Bang that when they measure the temperatures out the universe, is much more uniform than it should be. It shouldn't be like that. But then even among that uniformity, there's some small differences within it that again it shouldn't be. It should be a uniform temperature throughout. It is not. Again, talking about faith. So for their theories to work out, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know very much about dark matter and dark energy. I hadn't studied it very much. But they now say that everything we can observe in the universe is only 4% of what's really there. There's things called dark matter and dark energy, which you can't see, you can't measure, but it has to be there for our theories to work out, so we just accept it. They accept it by faith. There's zero proof that it's there. There is no proof that there's dark matter and dark energy, but they blindly accept it by faith. Evolution is a faith-based religion. If you want to say we want to take religion out of schools, take evolution out then. It's religion that they're teaching. The inconsistency of redshifts, they don't line up with what they predicted that it would be. The Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is a theoretical, hypothetical situation that they think the comets came from. Because comets, that's the other problem is, comets can't exist for more than a few thousand years. You used to have comets going around the sun. So the idea is there has to be an Oort cloud that every once in a while spits out a comet. There it goes, and there can't observe it, haven't seen it, can't prove it. Even Oort didn't see the Oort cloud. The sun is shrinking, that's a problem. For us, it's not. 6,000 years of history, that's not a problem. If you go back to billions of years, that's a problem. It means the sun would be very massive billions of years ago. That's a problem. The sun is brightening. Again, that's not a problem for us, but that's a problem for them. It means it would be too dim at some point in time to support life on the planet. How did the planets even get here? They can't explain it. They don't have a working model for this. Things about, again, I'm not getting all that again, but we talk about the magnetic field on Mercury. There is one. There shouldn't be. If it's billions of years old, it should have dissipated by now. It should be a cold, dead planet. It is not. Although the magnetic field they see is decreasing faster than ours on the Earth. The fact that the planet Venus is rotating backwards. What explanation do you have? It shouldn't be. If everything happened from the Big Bang, everything should be moving the same way. It's not. The fact of the rings on Saturn looking young and bright. They should be dim now over billions of years. They're not. They look very young, very beautiful. Just the fact of Uranus and Neptune existing defies evolutionary models. They don't have any explanation for how in the world this could have happened. Shouldn't be there, but it is. The fact that the moon is receding 1.5 inches per year. Again, for us, that's not a problem. Over 6,000 years, that'd be I forgot exactly what we said, but something like 800 feet. The moon might have been 800 feet closer than Adam and Eve would have seen. Not a big deal for them. If you go back billions of years, the moon would have been touching the Earth 1.2 or 1.4 billion years ago. Earth's rotational speed is slowing down, like a microsecond every year or a few years. So again, very, very small amount. not a big deal over 6,000 years. Big deal if you go back billions of years. That'd mean the earth is spinning so fast it's throwing stuff off of it, if that was the case. The magnetic field on earth has weakened 14% since 1829. And we mentioned the poles seem to change, but as far as growing stronger, that's not happening. You don't see the magnetic field growing stronger. That doesn't fit with, again, the billions of years. We talked about the 2.7 miles of ice on Antarctica, which again, how do you explain that? Is a desert. How does it have 2.7 miles of ice? Again, some of this is flood proof that we talked about, and that's a whole other thing that we could talk about. But it's now a desert. It used to be tropical. How was Antarctica a tropical place at one time? Marine, this is one of my favorite flood things. Marine fossils on the tops of mountains. How do you explain that? Again, we can explain it with the flood. How did those marine fossils get on top of Mount Everest and in the Andes in Peru? Polystrate fossils. Why do you have trees going through layers of rock? Pretty hard to explain. Observation tells us that's not possible, but yet that's what we see when we dig into those things. The circular reasoning of fossils. Told you how ridiculous that theory is. And again, I didn't realize this until really delving into this. How do they really get the dates? The dates they really get for the Earth and the planet is, okay, what fossils are in this layer? How do they date the layers? But what fossils are in the layers? Ridiculous. That circular reasoning is what they're using to do that. They always want to talk about the geologic column. I did not know this. But in the geologic column, less than 1/100th of 1% of all these things they try to in the textbook is made up of, that should be vertebrates, things with a vertebrate in it. Less than 1/100th of 1%. The rest of it is invertebrates, plants, etc. The geologic column is a marine deposit. So when you use that to date the Earth, that's the flood. The deposit that is Nicola Steno, the one that created stratigraphy, believed. There's no explanation on the evolution part for the Cambrian explosion. The life came fully formed all of a sudden. In the lowest levels, there's life is fully formed. It looks just like stuff today. Have no explanation for that. The existence of living fossils. That in this geologic column, there's things in the geologic column that stopped tens of millions of years ago that are living today. So again, they talk about things that, like dinosaurs, they think that went extinct 65. There's a lot of other things that stopped in the fossil record too, at those same levels that are here today. What's the explanation for that? Soft dinosaur tissue, we mentioned that. The evidence, the overwhelming evidence that dinosaurs and men lived simultaneously. Again, the evolutionists, they freak out when you talk about that, but that's what the evidence shows. Again, look at the science. That's what the science shows. And I'm a history person. That's what history shows as well. The inconsistency of dating methods, the potassium-argon dating, the uranium-lead dating, all these other things. That new rock, we said, gives you old ages. The volcanic explosions that's supposed to reset the clock. They use these methods are, again, millions and millions of years old when they happen within just a few years. It doesn't work. The existence of carbon-14 in fossils and other old material shouldn't be there. The C14 won't last a million years. They won't use C14 methods to date these things that are millions of years old because they've already made up their mind that it's not. The C14, how do you explain C14, carbon-14 being in diamonds? The hardest substance on Earth that's supposed to be a billion years old. How do you explain that? They can't explain it. We can. They can't. 90%. This is phenomenal to me. Talk about these dating things and again, their narrative of millions and millions. 90% of all dating methods gives you young ages, or at least younger ages than the millions and billions of years. 90% of them. Helium measurements and their amounts. Helium measurements show that the Earth is about 6,000 years old. Just like creation says. That's science. The explanation for ocean salinity. The percentage of salt in the ocean is about 3.5, 3.6% salt in the oceans. If the Earth is millions and billions of years old, shouldn't it be a lot more salt? Should. Ocean mud. Why do we have all the ocean mud? Or why do we not have more ocean mud? It's coming in by the tons every year, but there's very little on the ocean floors. Why is that? They can't explain that. Even where did the oceans come from? That was an amazing quote from an evolutionary scientist say, we have no explanation where the ocean came from. They can't even say where that happened. The oldest deserts, we said, are 4,400 years of age. That's science. Why are there not deserts older than that? The oldest trees, 4,400 years of age. The oldest coral reef, 4,200 years of age. Written history, we talked about no written history beyond 5,000 years ago. 99.9%, 96% of all mutations are harmful. We mentioned this, I think, last week. And when you look at those mutations, it is not an adding of genetic material. It is a loss of genetic material. There's no new material being produced. Things are being lost, information being lost to get some of the things we see today. How about DNA? Where did DNA? We looked at the complexity of DNA is mind-blowing. The design behind that couldn't have happened by chance in genetics. And again, I hope people continue to study genetics. The more and more they study that, the more and more I think that's going to point people to God, not away from God. The evidence of design, we talk about our incredible human body. How did all those things happen by chance? No way. There are no transitional fossils. Zero. So just the problem of a living cell, as Brother Lloyd said, that cell surviving and then replicating, that's a big problem to get over right there, big hurdle. There's no transitional fossils. There's none. There's no missing human links. We showed you how they're either hoaxes or misrepresentations. Either it is an old human or it's a chimpanzee. It is not an in-between. There is no in-between human links. And spontaneous generation we were talking about a minute ago, it's been disproven by science. And again, we talk about the motivation. There is an ulterior motive for believing in evolution. They don't want to believe in God, and so they're going to explain God away. All right, and I got this from another site. Some of the same things we just talked about quickly. Laws of science are consistent with creationism, the signs of intelligence in the universe, design in the universe, the probability of life from non-life is zero. Abrupt appearance of fully formed animals, the Cambrian explosion, the missing links are still missing. Man did not evolve from apes. Catastrophism explains the geologic column. There's no credible evidence for evolution. Science supports creation, and I agree with that. Hebrews 11 verse 1, faith is not the substance of fossils hoped for, and the links unseen. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Creation looks at the evidence. Evolution is making up the evidence and trying to commit a hoax on society. I think we got two or three slides left real quick. Life is very complex. This is why they need huge amounts of time to go from microbes to man. They need a great deal of time in the evolutionary model. And as we stated before, I think it's so important that we not compromise the 6,000 years. They want us to. They want us to, allows them the foot in the door. Don't compromise that. There's no reason for us to compromise that. 6,000 years is more than enough time of all history that's ever happened on the planet to have occurred. But they want to expand the time. We can't give in on that. Would we expect someone to win the lottery every day for 10 years? Again, talking about probability. Of course not. However, they need, again, long periods to make their theory tenable. The complexity of even the smallest, simplest cell is mind-boggling, as mentioned before. Even something this small could not have evolved from random chance. We saw the improbability of that occurring. So again, there is no evidence. You have to throw out the facts to believe in evolution. Young Earth creationists are not enemies of science. The opposite is true. Some of the legendary, the giants of science. You think about people like Newton, Isaac Newton, guy that invented calculus and all the things that he did, physics he invented. Kepler, Boyle, Maxwell, Faraday, Carver, and on you could go. The list of scientists that believed in God and became with these great discoveries. Creation is a very logical way to look at the planet. It makes so much more sense than evolution. The facts and true science match the Bible, not evolution. Evolution contradicts true science over and over again. Evolution contradicts science. It's not the friend of science. Life's underlying questions are answered by the Bible, and we're going to be getting that more in the coming days. Things do not create or make themselves. Nothing can create nothing. We all look at the same facts, but they can be interpreted according to biblical views, and this is being proven true every single day. The Bible, the book that we base our beliefs and views on, is unchanging, logical, makes sense, and is accurate in every detail recorded. Forensic science collects evidence. The judge and the jury interpret the evidence. In studying all the evidence related to creation versus evolution, the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of creation beyond a reasonable doubt or shadow of a doubt. And we would encourage any friends of ours online that are watching, that are looking at this, give them a challenge. Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence. How can we come into existence without a creator, without a designer? We are accountable to him. Jesus, the fittest of all, died for the unfit so that we can survive eternally. And what a wonderful message we have to share with the world. And that's what we aim to do, what we want to do. I appreciate so much y'all's patience with me the last few weeks and months. I've enjoyed the study, and I hope it's been a fraction as helpful to you as it has been to me. It's been a good study for me.
Can you go back over that?